The PlayStation 4 has had an unusually long life, especially with the recent release of the PlayStation 5 Pro and the early rumors of the PlayStation 6 starting to circulate. We're now halfway through the PlayStation 5's life cycle, and yet the PS4 still feels very present in gaming discussions. On the surface, it seems like the PlayStation 4 has stuck around longer than most of the consoles. And while that's true in some ways, it's also following a pretty standard path for outgoing platforms. Now, there's an article from an IGN brought up an interesting point about this. The Monster Hunter and Sonic teams were asked about the PS5 Pro and how they felt about supporting the new console. Unsurprisingly, the response were, quite different. Ryozo Tsujimoto, hopefully I'm not butchering his name, the producer of the Monster Hunter, was excited about the PS5 Pro, seeing it as a great opportunity to push the graphical boundaries with their upcoming game, Monster Hunter Wilds. They want to fully embrace the PS5 Pro's capabilities right away. On the other hand, Sonic producer Takashi Izuka has a different take. While they acknowledge the potential for faster, more visually impressive Sonic games on the PS5 and of course the PS5 Pro, they also emphasize the importance of continuing support of the PlayStation 4. For them, it's about ensuring that as many people as possible can still play Sonic games, even those on older hardware. This approach, as they see it, helps them reach the larger audience and ensures no one gets left behind. So this actually is an interesting take. And it actually brings us back to the article on a Tweettown by Derek Stigland, who reported on Sega's decision to continue supporting the PS4. Now, the headline suggests that the Sega and the Sonic team want to support the PS4 to maintain higher sale potential. Now, this idea was further explored by Matt Piscatella as an analyst at Circana, guys, I do apologize for butchering these names, who tracks video game sales data in the US. And now, his response was actually quite an eye-opening thing. He pointed out that while the PS4 still has an active user base, it's mostly being used for the free-to-play games like Fortnite, Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto 5, and of course Roblox. In fact, a third of all active PS4 users played Fortnite in September alone. Now, this data aligns with the broader trends that we've seen for the PS4. Sony's recent business segments briefing showed that there's almost an even split between active PlayStation Network users on the PS4 and the PS5. Now, this led to some surprise from those who expected PS4 to be phased out more quickly, but when you think about it, it actually makes sense. We're only halfway through the PS5's life cycle, and many people haven't upgraded yet, especially considering the availability issues with the PS5 in its first couple of years. It's unrealistic to expect over 100 million PS4 users to suddenly jump to the PS5 in just a few years. This isn't unique to the current console generation. We saw a similar pattern with the PS3 when the PS4 came out. It's a natural transition curve, where a portion of players stick with their old consoles for a while before eventually moving on. The difference this time around is that PS4 and PS5 share such similar system architecture that developing for both platforms is much easier than it was in the past. The transition from PS1 to PS2, PS2 to PS3, and especially PS3 to PS4 was much more challenging for the developers. The PS3, with its notoriously difficult to program for cell processor, was a nightmare compared to the PS4's more straightforward x86 architecture. Now, the ease of development is a part of the reason PS4 has stuck around. It's not as financially burdensome for the developers to support both PS4 and PS5. And many of today's games don't need full power of the PS5 to run well. In fact, a lot of games coming out today work just fine on PS4, and the difference between playing them on PS4 versus the PlayStation 5 might be faster loading times, higher frame rates, and slightly better resolution. For many players, this is just not big enough difference to justify upgrading immediately. Of course, there are games that will push the boundaries of what's possible on PS5 and the PlayStation 5 Pro, and those games will eventually phase out PS4 support. But for now, most developers still see value in releasing cross-gen games, even though Matt Piscatella pointed out that PS4 players aren't buying as many new games. There's still a large enough audience there for the developers like Sega to keep supporting it. It's not necessarily that they are expecting to sell a ton of new games on the PS4, but as long as the cost of port of the game to PS4 is low, it can still be worth it for them. Even if only a small percentage of PS4 players buy a new game, that can still be profitable if costs are kept down. At some point though, we will see the PS4 enter its true legacy phase. When that happens, it will likely look a lot like what we've seen with the PS3. As Matt Piscatella mentioned, many of the remaining PS4 players are there for free-to-play games, and there may not be the same type of players who are buying new games regularly. These players might be more casual gamers or people who can't afford to upgrade to the PlayStation 5 yet. They're happy sticking with the PS4 because it still supports the games they love, and in many cases they don't even need to pay for the PS Plus to keep playing those free-to-play games. In this way, the PlayStation 4 is following the footsteps of the PlayStation 3, which remained active for years after the PlayStation 4's launched. Even today, there are small communities of players still using the PlayStation 3 to play certain online games. These players are dedicated to their favorite games, and even though the majority of the gaming world has moved on, they keep those old consoles alive. The same thing is already happening with the PS4, and it will likely continue for years to come. But eventually developers will stop releasing new PS4 versions of their games. The cost-benefit ratio will no longer make sense, especially as more and more games are built specifically for the PS5 and beyond. At some point, Sony will likely shut down games submission for the PS4 just as they did with the PS3, signaling the end of the console active life. But even then, the PS4 will probably live on in some form, whether through emulation, fan-made service, or simply a beloved piece of the gaming history. For now though, the PS4 is still very much alive. It's not going anywhere just yet. Even as the gaming would shift more and more towards the PS5 and of course the PS5 Pro, the cross-gen period we're in right now is normal, even if it feels like the PS4 is overstaying its welcome. The reality is that the PS4 is simply following a natural decline, and it will continue to serve a purpose for many players until its time finally comes to an end. Tell me down in the comments as well, what do you feel about the PlayStation 4? Do you think it's overstaying its welcome? Do you mind even? And perhaps maybe you're considering that PlayStation 4 is actually holding back a lot of the game's capabilities and the potential. Nevertheless, tell me down in the comments. I'll see you guys all later. Have a wonderful day. And yeah, have a good one.